coming to you from the other Washington State, way up in the Pacific Northwest. I'm on the west side of the mountains, about 20 miles north of Seattle, and born and raised, one of the few natives up there. Just to give you a little bit of background, I do have a little bit of credential. I've been turning for about 16 years, and I've been branding and burning and embellishing my work for about 12 years, I guess. And so I was introduced to the whole idea of branding and burning and that type of embellishment when I saw Graham Priddle from New Zealand at the 2002 AAW symposium that was in Rhode Island. And I sat in on his rotation that talked about how to find inspiration for the embellishments or the work that you want to do on your piece after it leaves the lathe. And that's when I started thinking about, okay, the wheels started turning, going, okay, I want to somehow develop my own kind of what's basically called like a signature style, so that, for example, if I went into a symposium or was at a symposium, if people came in and didn't know that I was there and they looked in the instant gallery, they'd go, oh, look, Molly's here. So I wanted that kind of recognition of my work, and then in hopes that that would also produce some viable sales as well. So that's kind of how I got into it. And one of the things that Graham talked about with regards to finding inspiration for your work is to look to the areas that you have an interest in, what really kind of gets your creative ideas and juices going, where your passion lies, and then use elements of whatever your area of passion is and use that as inspiration for what you do on the outside of your pieces, which really proved to be very valuable advice, because when or if you want to develop kind of a signature style or some kind of embellishment that is recognizable as your own, you need to develop a fairly large body of work. It's not just kind of a variety of different things that cover a huge array of different techniques. If you want to establish kind of a signature, you really have to stick with something and then produce much of it, and not only to develop and refine it, but also to produce if you're going to look at selling. And if you're going to do multiple pieces of a similar style, you have to be as excited, if not more, once you finish a piece and you're ready to go on to another one, and not be going, oh, Lord have mercy, please don't make me do another piece. It's got to be, you set it down and you go, dang, love that thing. Now, what can I do next? Where can I take that next? And that excitement and that passion is what's going to keep you coming back and over and over and over again, and refining and developing, and kind of that whole evolution of the process of what you're doing, and keep you coming back for more. And so that's what I found I really needed to do. And so what I did is I've always been enthralled by Native American cultural imagery, primitive designs of pretty much any culture, cave art, the caves of Lascaux, France, or Altamira, Spain. Some of those are the more commonly known and famous, and I just really was very much enthralled in that ever since I was a really little girl. And so luckily it also kind of coincided with my artistic skill, which was, I thought at the time, nil. Didn't think I could draw myself out of a paper bag, but the imagery in more primitive styles is more of a symbolic kind of an imagery rather than anatomically correct, or something extreme like with my critters. When I draw my horse, it's not like Michelangelo's, where you can see every vein and every strand of hair and every little piece of muscular structure and the jawline and everything. Mine is, you draw it on a piece of paper, and if you bring it into a kindergarten class and go, what's this? They'll all go, look, a horsey! So just an image of that. And so that was, that helped to know that I wasn't as intimidated then trying to figure out how I could draw when I didn't think I could draw. So that all kind of happened really well. Well, then I was thinking, if I'm going to have imagery, I also want some way to make my pieces have a feel of an archaeological artifact, something that was of a primitive nature, primitive vessel. And so what I thought that I wanted to find is some way to enhance or frame the work that might look like it was a woven basket. So I started playing around. Luckily, a couple years after I saw Graham, he came out to the Seattle area and offered a 1- and 2-day workshop, very similar to what I'm teaching for some of the different clubs around here. And he showed us how he made his brands and showed us the wire, how to make a handpiece and all that. And then once he demonstrated what he knew, then he gave us the wire and said, now go play. See what you can come up with and what you can develop on your own. And so that's what we did. So during that particular workshop is when I came up with a brand that I use now that gives kind of the basket weave and the woven look. So as an example, let me see if, can we get a close, which camera was best for a close-up here? So you can see that, how that looks like a woven basket. That's what I wanted to come up with. So that was my goal. And so in that workshop, I started playing around with the nichrome wire and trying different configurations. I was one of the my club mates that was in that class took a piece of wire and wrapped it around it like a 1/4 inch something. He wrapped it 3 times around and then used it to imprint on the wood that gave 3 parallel hash marks. And I was looking at that and I go, oh, that's kinda what I'm thinking about, but I want it much denser, much finer. And so then I found a much narrower piece, a little nail that we were playing around with copper nails too. And so I took that copper nail and the wire and I wrapped it around the shank of the nail, really, really super tight, so each coil was right up against it. I'm going to show you how I make these, but anyway, so that's how I made that, and I went, ha, and I started playing around and patterning it on the wood, and started coming up and seeing in different configurations of how I could make these imprints into the wood so that it came up looking like a woven basket. And that's where it got started, and then it just kind of snowballed from there, and got a great critique. I won't go into that because that's not what you've asked me to do. You've asked me to burn, but I won't tell you about the kind of the evolutionary process of how it came up. But what I'm going to show you tonight then is some of the tips and techniques that I have learned over the years to get good, effective burning with some of the commercially made tips and wood burning tips that are on the market. For those of you that came thinking they were going to see turning and chips fly, sorry, you're just going to have to see smoke. So come next month for chips flying. And so I'm going to show you some of the commercially made tips, what you can get out, some really good ideas of how to get nice, clean, refined lines and not blotchy area, not blotchy type things, and a little bit of the benefit of my trial and error over the years. And then I'm also going to show you how I make my basket weave brand, and a couple of other brands that are pretty cool and that you can use to embellish your work as well. So any questions about all that before I get started? I'm going to sit down here and just kind of get into it other than that. Okay, if you have, actually I'm going to go ahead and pass some of these around just so you can get a closer view of them, and so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. I'm going to start here.
How'd you turn this square hole?
Oh, I could describe, yeah, the square, that's pretty cool, isn't it? I went to a class at Anderson Ranch, so very similar to Ergonomic, right? I took a week-long class with Christian Bichard, and this was quite a few years ago. And one of those things that happen in those classes that can pay for every penny that you just spent on your airfare and your tuition and your room and board and everything, it made everything worthwhile. That's what happened with regard to my rims, like the square rim and the fluted rims on some of these that you're going to see as they come around. Because I like primitive designs, I want to make sure that my vessels have also a primitive feel or more organic feel to them as well, so that the surface embellishment flows very nicely with the vessel that it is on. So there's no struggle between a style or design of the vessel as opposed to the embellishment that I'm putting on the surface. So whenever possible, I love to have wood that will give me a natural edge because it's a lot more organic. Well, in this particular class, I was whining, I guess you'd call it, pissing and moaning and lamenting the fact that it's very difficult to find wood that you can have a nice natural edge every single time you want to turn something. And I think Christian got a little bit fed up with my whining, and finally he just stopped me and he said, "Look, Mom, just because it comes off the lathe round doesn't mean it has to stay round." And I went, "Oh." He said, "For heaven's sake, just carve the rim." And it was like, ding! Why didn't I think of that? And so that's when I came up with the flutes, the 3 flutes. And I took a piece, I don't have one handy, but I took a piece that had just a round rim, basic same form, to another piece that had exactly the same form, but then I fluted the rim and I put them side by side and I went, holy cannoli. The difference, one tiny little change in just the rim was an exponential overall impact of the entire piece. And so there was an excellent lesson for me, one, to realize just because it comes off the lathe doesn't mean it has to stay the way that it came off. You can alter it, you can change it, you can modify it. But also, it also made me much more aware of all the different elements of a piece when I'm looking at its composition. So not only am I looking at the form, does the form meet or match the style of embellishment that I'm putting on it? For example, the more organic form, like a Southwest Indian style form to a primitive design on top of that, that blends well. But I pay attention to my rim. I'm more deliberate in what I choose. When I set that piece on the lathe, before I start turning it, I'm going to, in my mind, go, okay, this particular piece, I am going to flute. So then it's very deliberate. I'm also paying very close attention to my bases. How is my base going to be? What's the size proportion? Is it going to be a pedestal base? Is it going to be a small base? Is it going to tuck? Is it going to, I'm very, very deliberate in the full composition of the piece. The square opening came from, I was flipping through a book that 14 families of Pueblo pottery. And as I'm flipping through the book, there is a picture, a beautiful picture of a piece of pottery that had a square opening. Well, I took pottery for about 5 or 6 years in my past, so I kind of know how the mechanics of how that potter made that. And basically, he made it cylindrical. If it came off of a wheel, it came off round, and then he went tap, 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 and he made it square. If he was hand building it, basically the same thing, came up round, and then he was able to form and move and manipulate the clay into a square form. I realized you can't do that with wood. I had to figure out and then calculate how I was going to leave some waste wood on the rim so that once it came off the lathe, I could carve up to that rim to make it square. So if you look at the piece from a bird's eye view, down over the top of the piece, you've got the outside and here's the interior. This is the hole that you're hollowing here in the center. And so you have to leave extra meat or extra wood on the outside of that rim so that you can carve away into the square. And so then I turn up to a certain point, and then I take it off the lathe. I keep it in the chuck, but I take the whole chuck and everything and set it down on the ways, and then I draw out the square, and this is that bird's eye view, the square here on the outside of it, and then on the hole that I'm hollowing it through, I do the same thing right up on the edge of that hole, and I draw that. Okay, on these corners, I draw a line down, straight down on the side of the vessel with a pencil, so that then, once I'm done turning the vessel and I'm ready to carve this opening, I do not carve away those pencil marks. Those pencil marks are kind of outlining the edges, or the squared edges of the rim. Then I carve away, because the vessel, you know, the vessel's out here, right? So I come up and I carve away up to that line right here. Carve this all away, making sure that I don't carve away that pencil line. And then so I do that all the way around the piece and carve up on the outside, leaving those pencil lines so that I have the squared edge. Then on the inside, I come out and carve away these corners with a Dremel rotary carver. And that's what leaves then the square opening. Does that make sense?
Yes.
That's how I do it. So, but if I'm going to do this type of a square opening, I have to know that I'm doing that before I set my rim, because I have to leave that extra waste wood. If I set the rim to kind of the maximum diameter that I want, and then later go, oh shoot, I want to square that out, it's not happening. I got to get another piece of wood and start over. With the flutes, I can, the three-fluted one, now that one I can form the same diameter that I want the rim to be, and then I just divide it out into thirds. Let me get different colors here so you can see it. So so here's again the bird's eye view. Here's the hollow. This is all hollowed out in here, and I just I draw this line and break that into thirds. Draw that line down the neck, again about 5 millimeters. I find that I use metric when I do this because I can do smaller increments. And then I draw on the piece this arch from the bottom of that line up to the center. See how I'm doing that right there? And then I start carving this inside away. And that leaves the three flutes. The black piece is maple. That has been ebonized with Thiebing's alcohol-based leather dye. It is one of the best ebonizing products that I have found anywhere. I can take a piece of holly or a piece of black walnut, dye it with that black, set them side by side, and you can't tell the difference. They are just jet black. It's a wonderful ebonizing product.
Is that the material you buy at the tack shops, leather shops? Or
Yeah,
saddles
yeah,
and boots?
Tandy's, any leather supply, shoe repair places sometimes will have it too. But you want to get, they have like an oil-based dye, but you want to get the alcohol-based dye. Yep. And it's definitely one of those kinds of products that if you want to leave any of your piece natural, undyed, you do not want to use the dye, because it leaches and bleeds through your wood. When I dye those, I pour the dye in the center and kind of swish it around to dye the interior. By the time I pour out any excess dye, it's already leached out to the surface. So you can't take that dye up to an edge and have it stop. It won't. So if you want to ebonize a piece right up to the edge of something and leave natural wood, in a case like something like that, I'll use a surface product more like gesso, black gesso, which is an acrylic medium, acrylic painter's kind of a primer, and it dries dead flat black. But it's a surface treatment. It doesn't penetrate the wood grain. It will sit only on top of it, and so you can take that right up to an edge. Yes, sir.
What's the name of it again?
The dye? Phoebing's leather dye. And you want the USMC, you probably know what that stands for, black. USMC black. All right, so let me start talking a little bit about my burning and give you some tips and techniques about this. The unit that I'm using here is made by a company called Burnmaster. This style of wood burner is not like your craft type wood burners that you can get like at Walmart or you used in Boy Scouts that looks like a soldering iron. Those are really not effective for the type of work that I do, and you'll probably have more frustration with something like that than you'll have success. And I'll kind of explain a little bit why in some cases. But so there's a couple of different types of wood burning units that are fairly commonly known on the market. This one's made by Burnmaster. There's another one made by Detail Master, Razor Tip, Coalwood. Those are some of the more commonly known wood burning units that are on the market. When people ask me for my opinion if they've not bought a machine before and they're looking to buy one, I tend to recommend I do recommend the Burnmaster. I like this, not that the other machines are bad, it's that this one is so good. I think this is a really, really good machine based on economic value, features, and versatility of temperature. This particular one, there's two different models. Eagle, which is what they call a dual port machine. That basically means you can plug two pens into the machine at once. There's a toggle switch on here, so you're only able to heat one pen at a time, but it's like a convenience factor. So you don't have to unplug and plug and unplug and plug. So that's the dual port machine. The Hawk, the other model, is a single port machine. They don't change power from one machine to the other. They're exactly the same with regard to what their power output is, and all the other features are the same. It's just an issue of how many pens you can plug in at the same time. I like the dual because I'm lazy and I don't like to have to unplug and plug and tangle with my cords all the time, so I like I use primarily two pens the most frequently, and so I like to have that dual port. Traditional pyrographers, and I'll differentiate them from me, I have kind of a different style. A traditional pyrographer builds up their design or their imagery using with the wood burning tool by layering different levels of shading in order to build up a design. They like really low temperatures, and then they slowly build up their designs through multiple applications of the burning pens to get their different degrees of shading. So they like machines that are very, very low temperature and that they can build up for. The style of burning and branding that I do is kind of on the opposite end of that scale. I like medium to high heat because I need that high heat in order to brand and have recovery time of the tip of my tool so that it recovers its heat very quickly and very consistently, so that when I make an impression, the second impression and the third and a fourth and so on, I'm not losing heat on that tip. So I like high temperature abilities. The razor tip, also they're very well known for the myriad of dozens of different specialty tips because they cater to fish carvers, bird carvers, and just general pyrographers. And so their specialty tips are phenomenal. What's really nice is they're starting to sell their tips, the tips alone, without the pen body attached. So for example, so when I talk about a pen body, I mean this tip here is soldered into the handpiece. You cannot remove that. So that's what I call a fixed tip pen. Okay? An interchangeable tip pen is something like this one. This one's made by Burnmaster, and you can see there are terminals, electronic terminals here at this end with set screws. So I can make a brand or buy any tip alone that is manufactured by any razor tip, detail master, burn master, Coalwood, any of the tips that are on the market, I can use with this pen by dropping the legs of the tips down inside these terminals and then tightening down the set screws to get a good connection. Okay, and so that's the difference between a fixed tip pen and an interchangeable tip pen. The razor tip, they're fixed tip pens because their equipment is designed for low temperature burning. Their pens are fairly lightweight and not very hardy. They do have an interchangeable tip pen, but when I use it and crank my heat up to get the heat to the brand that I need, I melt the pen and ruin the pen. Before Burnmaster came out with this one, there was no other commercially interchangeable tip pen on the market except for that made by Detail Master, like these guys. But their tips were friction fit. There was no set screw on here. So when you would unplug this tip and replace it with another, if the connection loosened a little bit, which is not an uncommon factor once you take them in and out for a while, if it's ever so slightly loose, it's not getting a good connection and the electricity doesn't pass through there, and you'll be drawing it along and your tip goes cold. There's nothing more frustrating and curse generating than drawing along and having you lose your power to your pen. And they don't care. I mean, I talk to them, I say, you should just put some set screws on it. Well, they don't care, so they don't do it. So I don't recommend their pens. So then by necessity, I had to make my own. And so this was one of the first ones that I made. Kind of standard pen body. It has the terminals that you can get like any electronic. They're European style terminal strips you get in a little plastic sleeve. Remove the set screws and pop these little metal terminals out. And so I use those to connect on through my wire. And that's how I made my pens. They worked very well, very nicely insulated. The wood acts as a natural insulator so it doesn't get hot and burn my fingers. But I found that when I'd use these, you can see this joint right here hyperextended. And I'd be branding away and sometimes be hours into a project, and I'd go in to go for lunch or something, and I'd have to take the pen out, and my hand was frozen. My fingers were frozen. I literally could not move my fingers from this position. So I would have to bend them out and get the flexibility back into my joints. Well, in the olden days before I started turning in my corporate occupation, I worked with injured workers and worked with testing and assessment and helping them return to work or look at retraining programs and somehow accommodate whatever their injury was. And on occasion, I would work with multidisciplinary teams. We had someone that had either carpal tunnel or hand injuries, amputations, or arthritis, or whatever the factor was that involved their hands. We'd work with occupational therapists to look at modification of tools. And one of the very common modifications of hand tools is to make them kind of in a ball form like this. And so what happens then when you're using that, now you can see that there is no stress or hyperextension on my joints. So now when I brand, my hand is very, very comfortable, and I can spend hours doing this and not have the stress and the problems on my joints. And so now I figured, well, I made these first, and I thought, I'm the one making the pen. It's just a matter of which piece of wood I pull out of my scrap pile and so what it's going to look like. So that's when I started modifying the body of the pen so that it fit more ergonomically in my hand, and now I don't have the stress and overuse syndrome problems with my joints. And so then I make a few different styles and modifications. Used to make these and sell them, and then I hate production work, and so I'd make 3, and pretty soon my eyes would roll in the back of my head and I'd look around the shop to see what I could clean. I used to clean their shop, but it was more appealing than production work. So that's when I made, starting these booklets over here, is how to make these pens. I made one more set of them and took pictures and put it all into a booklet and narrative, and all the parts and everything is in there, every how-to thing. And now I sell the booklet for $5 and I don't have to make these pens anymore. So anyway. But what's even cooler than that now is that Burnmaster then few years ago came out with this interchangeable tip pen. So if you don't want to make your own, but you still want a good interchangeable tip pen, you can buy these from Burnmaster, and they are compatible with any commercially made machine. It doesn't have to be a Burnmaster. You can use it with the razor tip, Coalwood, Detail Master, any of the machines that are on the market. You can use it with this. So that's another option for having an interchangeable tip pen. All right, so that's a little bit about the equipment. The other thing that I like about the Burnmaster, remember I said the razor tip, they like to finesse those low temperatures. I like to finesse the high temperatures. When this comes from the factory, it's this temperature range. When you go all the way down to low, it's a certain temperature. When you crank it all the way up to high, it's the maximum one. If the lowest temperature is not low enough for what you want to do it with, there's a hole at setting number 3 that you can insert a little Allen key in there and turn it to the left, and it will take that range of temperature and shift it down. Consequently, the other direction happens as well. If I want a higher, more powerful, I can turn it to the right, and that range goes higher. So it has quite a versatility in temperature range and finesse of the temperature that you want. It also has an internal breaker, so if you get a short or somehow get a surge of something, it will trip that breaker so that it doesn't fry the interior. And then you just reach behind it. There's a little button there to reset it, and you're off and running, and you don't. And so all of these features are exclusive to the Burnmaster, and the other equipment that are out there on the market don't have those features. Right out of the box, it comes with the adapter cords. If you're just buying the unit, it comes with the cords. They have a really sweet package deal that you can get for either the Hawk or the Eagle that comes with the pen, the cords, 10 tips. I mean, and it's a huge price break compared to what you would buy if you parted them out a la carte. Nice train.
Yeah.
So those are the reasons why I really, really like and promote the Burnmaster. I don't get any kind of a price break on them, or any kickbacks or any commissions or anything. It's just a great product that I really, really like. Yes, sir.
Any of the tips that Burnmaster have comparable to the one that you have?
Similar, yes. Okay, okay. Burnmaster's machines, amazing. Engineered beautifully. Their pens, amazing. Engineered beautifully. And I've told this to the president. I got to talk to him one day. He was at Tampa. Anyway, their tips, they suck. You know, they're okay.
Right, that leads to the second question. Do you have a patent on that, and why aren't you talking to Burnmaster?
Oh, for my ergonomic pens?
Your ergonomic pens. You don't have to produce them anymore. You just get rid of
Well, that's why I make the booklets. I get $5 for each booklet. Woo! No, it's not worth it for me to go through all that stuff. It really isn't.
What's the price of that?
On this, the unit itself, without the pen and without the tips, the unit itself, the dual port machine, I think is about 175, I think. The single port machine is about 150-ish. You can get for $259, you can get the dual port machine, 2 of the interchangeable tip pens, a carrying case, and the and see if I can get a few shavings. Don't dig too hard. Now that needs a little bit more. I'm getting a little bit there. But you want that razor sharp. I mean razor sharp. Once you have sharpened that on the stone, don't go back to the stone ever again. Unless you nick it or take a chunk out of it or drop it on the floor and dull that edge. Don't go back to the stone again. Because if you go back to the stone, their weak point right here at the bend. If you start taking too much of that steel off, you'll weaken it and eventually break it right there. If you get that razor sharp to begin with, and then you maintain it by stropping it. So you can get a little, this is a flex cut little maintenance board that you can get to for your carving gouges. Costs like 15 bucks. Where whoever sells carving tools, you can find something like this. Or you can make it. Get a piece of leather or suede, glue it to a flat piece of wood, get some sharpening compound and rub it on there. This one comes with a little sharpening compound stick. Just rub that on that leather. And then, let me see if I can find one that's... So here, this guy here, he's been used quite a little while. See how he's kind of charred and dark? So two things are going to happen. When I strop this on the leather, not only am I bringing that edge back, but now you can see the carbon buildup came off. See that nice and shiny edge? So that's cleaned off the carbon, any carbon buildup, and it's brought and honed that edge back to its razor sharpness. So if you just strop after you have that original edge, you won't need to take it back to the stone, and it'll last you forever if you're not too rough on that. This particular pen that I have in my hand right here is one of my original pens. I think I bought it about 12 years ago. So, and it's still running strong. This particular one I had to replace the plug. The plug shorted out, but the tip is just fine. The other one that I have another one over here too. That's just the same age as this. Works great. But that's a definite key and tip that you really want to take to heart. If the edge of a wood burning tip that you have looks like it should be a blade, it has to be razor sharp. Because when you're using that to outline and to draw your lines, you want it not only to burn through the wood, but you want it to cut the wood fibers also. If it's dull, frequently what will happen is you'll have lines that might look like this. See those blotches? What's happening there, if I'm just, and I had to exaggerate to get those, but if you're drawing a straight line and you're getting blotches like that, what's happening, if the pen is not sharp, wherever it's a blotch, that's because it's sunk into soft wood. Where it's a narrower line, this pen has skated or slid across the top of a hard growth grain line. By sharpening the pen, what you're doing is you are cutting as well as burning those fibers, and so you can get a straight, non-blotchy line. That makes sense? Okay. Couple of other little tips about this. I use this particular tip for a couple of different things. For all of my outlining, if I'm outlining all my horses, I'll draw my horses in pencil, and then I'll go back over those pencil lines and outline them. Like so. And this pen is invaluable for outlining. It's definitely one of the pens you want in your kit because you'll always use it. See how I'm always moving this piece around? It's really important that you have the flexibility. And you can see I'm working in my lap rather than flat down on the table. It's because if you'll watch, I'm not only moving the pen tip, but I'm also moving my left hand and moving the piece. You'll also notice my little finger here is always in contact with the piece as well. You need that stability in order to keep your lines, because you see my hand's shaking a little bit here because I'm old and my hands shake a little bit. But when I anchor myself, I not only anchor my hand to the workpiece, but I'm also anchoring my elbows and my upper arms into my body. Very much like turning. When you anchor yourself to your tool, you've got the tool against your hip and against the tool rest, and as you do your cuts, you're swaying your body. It's kind of like a dance as you're at the lathe. There's a lot of body movement, not just unsuspended arm movement. Very similar techniques with regard to anchoring yourself for consistency when you burn also. Question?
Does it matter what type of graphite or what type of pencil you use?
Yes, it does. Graphite is what I recommend. When I draw, I use graphite pencils. You can get it at Michael's or wherever, any kind of...
Is that a soft?
It's a softer lead. This is a 7B, 3B, 4B, 5B, anything that has a... I don't use a number 2 pencil because the lead is too hard, and it will actually sometimes score the wood as you're drawing. And I don't always go over my pencil lines exactly as I draw them. And you want to be able to get rid of that pencil line, or if you're tracing something, that graphite line, after you're done burning. And I have found that number 2 pencil or a hard lead pencil will sometimes score the wood, and you'll leave a scratch mark in the surface. And so I use that also. The graphite, you want a graphite pencil, not like charcoal or some other product, because in a minute I'll show you why the graphite, I can get rid of a graphite line very easily from the surface of my piece. So I'm anchoring my arms, my elbows into my body, anchoring my hand to the piece with that little finger kind of as a little outrigger. And that allows me to flow that through where I want to burn very securely. Now I've got my temperature up a little bit here.
How hard are you pressing?
About the same as I would with a ballpoint pen or a pencil. Not super light. If I do super light, I don't have the, hang on. Why don't you just go ahead and zoom out a little bit or widen, because I'm up at the other end. There we go.
Okay.
I'm up here. So if you go too light, you're not going to have the control. It'll skip around. So you do want to put a little bit of pressure. Not force it, but a little bit of pressure just to get a nice gentle bite to the wood. Some other types of mistakes that can happen as you're first starting to learn how to do this is you might get a line that looks like this. So they've got a blotch at one end where you enter the line and then they taper off. What's happening here is that I'm setting the pen down and then moving, but I'm hesitating for a second before I move on. Even a very slight hesitation before I move can result in that blotch. The same thing can happen if I'm going along and I hesitate before I come out of as I come out of the line. As I'm drawing my line and I just stop for a second and pause, you're going to get them at the end of your line. So I do what I call coming in or going in and coming out running, or like a touch and go in an airplane. You want to be moving as the pen makes contact with the wood, and keep moving as you lift from the wood, so that you avoid the blotches at the beginning and the end of your lines. The other issue is that if you have a particularly long line and you're going along and you can see what's happening here is this fading. That's because the heat is being drawn from that tip on that very long line. And as I get near the end of my line, it's going to be cooler than where I was at the beginning of that line. And so you want to be able to, by going in and coming out running, you want to be able to get to a certain point and stop, and then reposition your hand and transition and pick up and continue on, so that your line width is consistent. I am making this look easy because I have 12 years of experience. If you're going to be in one of my workshops, or you go home and you dust off your wood burner, or you go buy one and you sit down and you start burning, and you keep going line after line after line after line, it's like, dang it, I'm not getting. She did it like the second time she went through that line. That's because I have 12 years of experience. When you're in my workshop, we are going to go through all this kind of stuff at the beginning of in the morning. You're going to go through a lot of trial and error, and that because there's a finesse. Just like turning, my guess is, unless you're an idiot savant, the first time you stepped in front of that lathe, you did not come out with a gallery quality piece. Am I right? Okay. Same thing.
We're all perfect.
Yeah, it's that idiot savant thing. Same thing with burning. When you start doing your burning, that is why in my workshop we outline, we trace an image onto this flat piece of wood, and then we start practicing. And I emphasize very, very strongly that that piece will not be frameable. You will not take it home, and your wife, well, for heaven's sakes, if you have a wife that says, "Oh, honey, it's gorgeous," and you think it's ugly, don't show it to her. Put it in your toolbox. Keep practicing, and then show her something that you're happy with. Because you will not, the first few, who knows how many projects that you start working on are not going to be pretty. There is a learning curve. You will start getting the feel of where there's a sweet spot in temperature, how that temperature relates to the particular species of wood that you're burning. Every species kind of has a little different finesse to what temperature. A level 3 on maple is going to be completely to a level 3 on Osage orange. Density, porosity, all kinds of other species factors will affect how and what temperature you're going to use. I always recommend that if you're not really sure where to start, always have a scrap piece of the same species of wood as your project and start on it first. Find your sweet spot of your temperature, so that when you working on your piece, you don't have an overburn because you can't erase. Speaking of erasing, remember I said the graphite is what I recommend. Graphite pencil to draw on a design. If you're going to trace on a design like from an image that you can get from some book or something else that you wanted that is not copyrighted, I like to emphasize that. If you want to trace something, use graphite paper. Do not use copy paper. If you have an old stack of copy paper from your the old typewriter days, don't use copy paper. You get graphite paper, because see on if we get a close-up on here, switch to you, Tom. Da, 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 da.
You know you saw.
Ta-da! See how his tail, I switched the position of his tail? I did not burn over where I drew. So, and also see there's a little bit of what I call kind of ghosting or a little bit of light staining around the edges of that burn. Once you have finished all of your burning, to clean that up, isopropyl alcohol, rubbing alcohol. Usually what you'll find in the drugstore is 70%. Try to find the highest percentage you can. 91, 99%. Usually it's right next to the 70. Or if you can't find it, ask the pharmacist and they'll have, because the higher percentage alcohol, the less water, less opportunity to raise grain. So you get a little bit, either a little old t-shirt, cotton cloth, or one of these little makeup cotton sponges, and just clean that and wash that image. See how it took away the graphite? But it also will take away some of that little bit of ghosting or a little bit of staining. And it's kind of like taking your camera lens, and if it's slightly out of focus, and then giving that tiny little tweak, and all of a sudden the picture just goes boing and pops at you. The same thing can happen with your burning. It'll look, as you finish your project, and it'll look ever so slightly hazy. When you take your cotton pad and that alcohol over the top of that and clean off some of that overstain and any little graphite line that was left, it's going to pop your design. Great, just pop it really well.
What about moisture content of the wood? Do you have a meter and you check it and you go to a minimum or something, or?
Are you an engineer?
No. Well, I work with engineers.
Well, see, that's the problem. No, moisture content. Sorry, I like to pick on people like that. I'm a like by the seat of my pants kind of person, so I don't bring the moisture meter out and check it. I have found if I have a sopping wet green piece that, you know, as I turn it, I have to wear a raincoat. I'm not going to burn it.
Ready to burn it.
I'm not going to burn it. I'm going to wait until it's a lot more air dried. If it's just an air-dried piece of wood, it has a little bit of moisture in it, more often than not, it's not going to be a factor in your burning. I've not seen it be a significant factor.
You do your ebony stain after the pyrography, or?
Yes. I don't put any kind of a finish on my piece if I'm going to burn it. I always burn first. Always. Because for a couple of different reasons. One, I don't know what's going to happen when the heat boils the finish, what kind of toxic fumes that's going to create. It's one thing to protect yourself from the regular fumes, but when you burn it, when you heat it, it can release pretty nasty stuff, and I don't want to breathe it. It can also mix and boil it and gum it and gooey, and it can ruin it because you've just boiled a finish like a lacquer or whatever, shellac, whatever you're putting on it, it'll boil that, and it can be gummy and gooey and totally ruin it that way. So I never put any kind of a finishing product on the wood prior to burning. So this guy's cherry. See how deep, rich that black is? There is no ebonizing product on that at all. This is straight off of the brand. There is nothing that has darkened that. Now, look at this piece. See how this piece kind of a little bit behind, you can kind of see a lightness come through. This is ambrosia maple. Depending upon the species of wood will vary the level of blackness that will come straight off of the tool. Some, like maple is prone, holly's a little bit prone, very Bradford pear, very blonde. Woods that don't have like an oil kind of content to its moisture or a tannin to its moisture tends to shine a little bit of the blondness through the burn. Cherry must have enough tannin or there's enough kind of oil to the water, kind of the moisture in that it just is absolutely I think Drop Dead Gorgeous Black. I love straight off of the brand from that. Cherry's my favorite.
Even the sap wooded cherry, do you do sap and heartwood? Or
I've done sap and heartwood. Yeah, there might be a little bit of blondness that might come through it, but I haven't had a stark different on a piece that has a real stark difference of sap and heartwood to actually compare the two together. But that's why I like it so much. And it smells divine, especially if it's green. It smells like a Luden's cough drop factory in my shop when I turn it. So I get that factor as well. Let me show you how I make my basket weave brand. So I differentiate between burning and branding. When I refer to things, when I burn something, that tends to be when I'm outlining or image work. I'm creating some kind of an image with my wood burning. This particular piece, I call that burning, wood burning, because I've outlined the piece and then I've textured in the interior of that, like the heron here. He's been outlined, and then a stipple burn, just a dot 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 with a very blunt tip. Either a piece of wire that's been bent over and just crimped to be blunt, or a little ball tip. You can buy ball tip pens that have a very blunt tip, and that's just a little stipple burn in here. The lily pads are done with a shading technique, more of a, I'll take this, my outlining pen, sure it's cold, and
sure.
well, I looked on there. That's one way. I don't want to ruin the piece. I heal. The piece doesn't. And I lay it flat.
Cameraman's right by.
Yeah, here. And I lay it flat, and then kind of gently kind of draw in on the flat surface of the side of the pen. Okay. So that's how that particular one was created. I love this particular piece. It was, I turned the bowl. And then I saw the spalting on here, and I thought, gosh, that kind of looks like clouds. And then the curl on down here made it look like water. And I said, well, that's obvious what I'm going to do here. So that's how he became what he is. It's one of my favorite bowls lately. So anyway, so that's what I refer to when I'm talking about burning. When I'm talking about branding, branding is like an imprinting into the wood. It's like a stamping process. I am imprinting into the surface of that wood using something that, in just a matter of how I lay out those imprints, but it's a stamping process. So that's what I'm referring to when I'm talking about branding.
Just want to go back a little bit. Maybe you don't know this trick. Think of somebody who's worked with soldering iron a lot.
Uh-huh.
If you hold the tip a little bit under your nose, you can tell if it's hot.
Well, yes, I've done that too. I knew. The light was not on, so so yeah. There's lots of different ways that, without putting it on your hand, to test that. It's probably a good point. All right. So I use nichrome wire. You can't just use any old wire that you run across in your shop or at the store. You need nichrome wire. I've written that up on the flip chart there. Nichrome wire. I primarily tend to use two different sizes, 20 gauge and a 22 gauge. The 20 gauge is thicker than 22, so the bigger the number, the finer the wire. I get, like for my standard brand that I'll do on pieces that are about all the size that I was showing you earlier, and 5 to 6 inches, 4, 5 to 6 inches and taller, I tend to use my standard size brand that I'm about to show you how to make here with the 20 gauge wire. When I scale down, like my little miniatures that are here that are about 1.5 to 2 inches tall, I scale my basket weave brand down smaller to scale to the piece. And that particular one, then I switched to 22 gauge wire, which is a finer wire, and I reduced the size of when I'm wrapping it around to make it smaller. I learned that I was scaling up. I was making pieces that were about 12 to 14 inches tall, and I wanted to scale up. And I thought, well, when I scaled down, I reduced the size of wire and diameter. I'll just increase the size of the wire. So I went to 18 gauge wire and a little bit larger. What I wrapped it around and found I was using too much volume of wire to heat and get that recovery time. So that when I would make that imprint number 1, by the time I picked it up and went to set it down for number 2, it wasn't hot enough to give the consistent burn because there was too much volume that it had to recover in that time period. And that was slowing me down like crazy because like on this particular piece, 2/3 of this piece is brand. So if I have to touch 1, 2, 3, touch 1, 2, 3 on 8 inches of a 12-inch piece, I'm going to be there forever. And so I actually found the way to scale it was that I stayed with the 20 gauge wire and then just increased the diameter of what I wrapped it around, and then spaced the coils out a little bit so there was a little bit of a gap because I found I lost, by keeping the coils straight right up against each other, I lost the definition inside the brand. So I realized I had to leave a little bit of a space in order to get that ridginess inside the brand. So I used to wrap it around a nail, on the shank of a nail. And then I found that it's really hard to lock round to round. So I got intelligent one day. I was looking through, oh my gosh, if you have never seen this catalog, it's very, very dangerous. Micromark. If you like working with small stuff, this is a very expensive catalog. But I'm flipping through it and I found this set of mandrels. These are just 2 out of, I can't remember how many, I think there's like 6 or 7, I don't know, all kinds of different mandrels that range anywhere from 1 millimeter, 1.5, 2, all the way up to fairly thick. This, let's see, this is 1 millimeter and this is 1.5 millimeters. So I bought the whole set just to get these 2. Because what I could do was by having this hex here, this is designed to go inside your drill. This hole is, you would, for people that, the way it's was designed to use it, you put the wire through here, bend that over, put it in your drill and go zzz, and you get all these little, you get this little spring that you can work up here. Well, then you have to snip it off right here at the hole in order to slide it off the mandrel and start using it. Well, I can't do it that way because I need one leg. That's got to be one leg of my brand. But what I can do is I can lay it flat on that mandrel, on that hex there, and then with my vice grips I can lock then the wire to that hex on flat to round, and now I don't have to find that sweet spot of a round edge to a round surface to a round surface. And so, but I'm going to give you an even better clue. Micromark is good, and I highly recommend getting their catalog if you like to spend money on small stuff. But I also found, I went to Lowe's, Home Depot probably has it too, and I went into their drill section. I found this set for $3.29. I got these 2 drills, and one of them is 1/16. That's 1/16, and this is too small for my eyes to read. I don't know, it's a little bigger. 3/32, I think. Anyway, so I got these. And because these are sharper than snot, I modified them by just cutting off the drill flutes, because that's all I need. Okay? And they're both the perfect size. This is for my standard size, and this is for my mini, my little guy. So now I take about a 4 to 5 inch piece of wire, I lay that against the hex right there, and I get it. You need to have vice grips to lock this down. You will not be able to hold the wire against the mandrel and have it stay put. You need that vice grip to lock it on so it does not move at all. Because if it's going to slip around, your coils are going to vary in, some will stand higher and lower and tighter and looser than the ones next to them, and it's going to mess with your overall look. So you lock that on. You need this about 1 inch out here because that's one leg of the brand. That's one of the legs that's going to go down inside the terminal of that pen. Then with the long end, you're just going to wrap it around this shank right here, and for what I want, I've found that I wrap it 5 times. Keeping a very steady tension on this wire, and so that each one of these coils is right up against the preceding one and snug against the mandrel, because I don't want anything higher or lower on here. See how that's nice and even? And each one of those coils is right up against the other one. Now the wire went into the mandrel right here. I want it to come out of off the mandrel on the same plane, so that I don't have this coming in here and this leg shooting off in the other direction. Because those have, eventually they have to be parallel to one another, those legs do. So I found that for me, 5 wraps made the brand, the length, twice as long as its width. Because when I go to make the imprints on the piece, I'm going to have 2 in a horizontal orientation, and in the row just beneath it, I'm going to have 2 in a vertical, and I need them to square up. Okay, so the length has to be twice its width for the style of what I want to achieve. When we're in the workshop, I'm going to show people how to do this. We're going to make these, and then I'm going to say, but that's only because that's how I want it. Doesn't mean that you can't have 3 wraps. Or it doesn't mean that you can't have 2 or 4 or have a gap in between them, each one of those, or what, you know, is what you want to achieve is how you make it. So then I just take that off of the mandrel. Now I've got one leg perpendicular to the other, and I need them to be parallel. So I'm going to get a pair of needle nose pliers, and I'm just going to hold on to those coils together while I bend this leg down, because if I don't do that, these will splay out. Okay, so I'm going to get a grip there, and then I'm just going to bend that down parallel to the other leg. Okay? Then I'm going to trim. If I leave the legs this long, when I put that into the pen, and it's got a grip on, if I leave this much of a length here, as I make the imprint, the wire softens and it will bend over and drive you nuts, because you have to put a little bit of pressure to make that imprint. So I have found about 3/4 of an inch long is a good length. So I trim those legs down. And there it is. It ain't rocket science, but it's pretty cool what happens. So let me put that in here. So let's see. So I'm just going to loosen my set screws so that those 2 little legs will drop down into those terminals. Tighten the set screws just so they're snug. You want to be careful when you're tightening the set screws, especially if your pen is hot and you're switching from one tip to another, if you crank down on them, you will push so hard that the back of this terminal will crack and break. So you want that snug, but not so hard that you're going to break the back of that terminal. Just good contact. I'm going to turn my heat up very high, and you'll see how quickly the wire heats up here. Pretty soon, it's already starting. See? That's one. You don't want to check the temperature on this one at the moment. So that's pretty excessively hot. I mean, it's probably going to flame when I hit it. Yeah, wee! Graham Priddle, as I mentioned before, my mentor, he likes flame. If he doesn't get a flame, he feels as if he is somewhat less of a man. God bless him. So he likes, I don't know if you've ever heard of his kind of vaporizer. There's some guys will convert a battery charger into a wood burning unit. That it came from Graham. He didn't have a commercial wood burner. He converted a battery charger. And then he started showing people how to do their own and making that. And they're pretty cool. I mean, they're kind of a neat contraption. If you like making tools, a lot of guys like to make them because they're really awesome. And you can get, they call them the vaporizer because if you don't moderate the heat and the power output on that, you will literally vaporize like 12 gauge wire. You turn it on and it'll go boop, and it's gone. So it's pretty effective if you have a fairly high volume or complex piece of brand or wire. I tend to not use, I have one, but I tend not to use it very often because it's just, I can't finesse it. I can't finesse the temperature down when I want to have a little bit more precision in my burning. I use it mostly like when I scale up or if I have a particularly big or clunky type of a brand that I need that extra power. So as you can see, all I do is just lay the brand against the wood in order to make an impression into it. You see the little ash that's dropping off? So as it burns, sometimes you'll get that ash. Now, if this were one of my pieces, like if it were this piece here, I would start at the score line and go around and do just like what I'm doing on the practice wood here, and do one row, that first row, as in a vertical orientation because it provides a nice border. I like that because it's a nice crisp edge to it.
You ever wear a respirator?
Oh, yes. You will have my public service announcement shortly. Yes. Yes. So that would be my first row. I knock the ash off underneath it because I'm going to be burning away what's underneath here. And if I leave a little bit of a mark like that, I'm going to burn it away. It's not going to be a problem. So then I'll do that as my very first row around the piece. And then once I've gone all the way around it and met where I started, I'll drop down to row number 2. And this is where I start the alternating pattern. I'll do 2 touches in a vertical orientation, and then I'll rotate the piece and do 2 touches in a horizontal. Rotate back, 2 vertical, rotate 2 horizontal, and I just keep this pattern up all the way around until I meet up again where I started. Okay? Then to get the woven look, now on row number 3, let me just go a little bit further. Row number 3, wherever I did 2 that are vertical, now I'm going to switch to the horizontal right underneath it. And again, this illustrates why I need the length of my brand to be twice its width so that they square up.
Do you ever have any problem where you're doing this particular process where you come to the end and you have space?
Yeah, sometimes like a half of a space, or if there's no guarantee that when I come around, if I started here in this 2 vertical orientation, that when I come right up to it, that it's going to be a horizontal one right next to it. Sometimes what'll happen is it would end up being 2 verticals side by side. What I do to prevent or to deal with that particular issue, let me give you an illustration here. Okay, so here's where I had started. I go all the way around the piece. I come up, and I'm coming up in here, and I'm getting really close to meeting up. So I'll stop about this far out, or maybe even a little bit further out, and I'll calculate. Okay, these 2 are vertical, so then there's going to be horizontal, vertical. I'm going to have a half a space, or if they were going to be 2 vertical. So then I go, okay, how am I going to do that? I'm going to work it together. I'm going to do 2 touches there, 2 touches there. Sometimes, well, it's turning out, and I shouldn't have had it turn out. And so, but sometimes it'll do that. It'll turn out that way. Or I might do one touch. I'll divide that one in half. And I'll just have 1 vertical and one vertical surrounded by the 2. And I'll show you, I'll illustrate that on this piece. See if I can find one. I'm telling you my secrets now.
Some sort of code.
There is a code. Usually down here is where I can find it, near the bottom. Oh well, here's one. 2 horizontal, 1 vertical, kind of short, and I kind of blended that in. You'll also notice, okay, here's another illustration. Sometimes as the diameter of the piece gets smaller near the foot, you're also going to almost like dropping stitches. As you go around your, so here's vertical or horizontal, vertical, pretty soon, but look what's happening as I look, they're starting to catch up with them. And see these 2? And these 2? What happens right when they start lining up like these 2 right here, I will stop this row that I'm working on. I'll stop right here, and I'll go down right underneath it, and I'll put the 2 vertical. Just this touch alone, just this one. Then I'll go back up and finish, and now if you keep following my finger, as I turn this, you can see it's starting to spread out again, and pretty soon, now they're alternating. Okay, so then I'll finish this row. Then where I start my next row is that one that I dropped down and left single. Because what I am preventing, like this one here, that's where I would start. What I'm preventing is having 3 of this similar orientation, one on top of the other. Because when this was sitting on the table, chances are when you were looking at it before the session began, I'm guessing you didn't see that. You didn't see that flaw or that adjustment there. That's because when there's a slight deviation from the overall pattern, the human eye fills it in or skips over it when there's a very slight modification. However, if there were 3 in a row of the same orientation, one on top of the other, it's a strong enough deviation from the surrounding pattern that your eye will zero in on it. And that's why I don't want any more than 2 similar ones like that. So that's how I accommodate the issue of this decreasing diameter of the piece, and as you start catching up. I've had people say, why don't you just switch to a smaller brand? Well, that would be like too much of a deviation. You would see the size difference shift. That's why somewhere down here you'll see a lot more of that near the bottom when you look closer. When you pull it up and you start looking at the details, that's what you're going to see. The other issue is down here. I'll get down on a piece about so far here, and I'll stop, and I'll come around, and around the foot, I'll do that same vertical orientation, framing the foot, so that as I come down the piece, then there's again no guarantee that there's going to be a perfect line from on the last row. And on this one is a good example. It's a half of one. Here's this last row right here was the full width and length. The one in between the foot border and that was only a half a distance. And so on a horizontal touch, I could do one touch of the brand. On the vertical, I had to tip my brand up on the edge and just like have 3 coils touch it. So like right here, 3 coils touched that spot. See? So you blend it into, and it's a whole lot easier, and less obvious to blend at the base of your piece because that's what's sitting on the table and your eyes don't look underneath the edge. But even when it's held in the hand, it's a nice transition enough blend that it's not obvious. Does that make sense?
So when you're doing something like a cove like that, you have a special tip that's got an arc so that all the pieces, coils hit at the same time, or not? Or
I don't. It's same piece. I don't
Really?
modify it. I just sometimes. I mean, some woods will take a deeper impression than other woods, like your Osage orange handles on your rolling pins. Osage orange laughs at you and calls you names when you try to burn it.
Try to cut it.
It is extremely dense, extremely burn resistant. It's great firewood because it'll last all night long. But to brand it, and especially brand it, now you can get some nice burn designs and image designing on it, but to brand it, it barely impresses into the surface. But then you go on the other side of it, you'll get something like Spanish cedar or mahogany or something that is a very, very loose, almost spongy kind of content or density to the wood, and that will leave a huge impression to the point of burning through it.
So you sneeze, and next thing you know, you just
Oh my gosh! I finished a piece, and I was looking at it. It was one of my earlier pieces, and I was looking at it. I was so happy with how it turned out, and I happened to go like this, and it went, and I could see this dot 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 dot. These little pin pricks inside. I went, oh, and I held it up to the light, and went, dang! And what had happened is I don't know how this happened, but when I had turned it, I had one little shallower or thinner wall thickness than what was around it. It had either a little catch or it was just a little thinner, and the impression of the burn left these tiny little pinpricks that had burned through. And I looked at it and I debated, and I could see it, and I went like this to see if the structural integrity was good, and it was, but it was being given as a gift, and I thought, I cannot let that happen. I can't let that quality of a piece, knowing full well that there's a flaw, so I smushed it and after hours of work on it. But that's what can happen if you're not careful. If your wall thickness is too thin, or you have a particularly soft density and a thinner wall, you can burn through. Oh gosh, look what time it is. We need to be done, don't we?
Yeah, pretty quick.
Okay, so any questions about that? I wish I could show you some others. If you really, really like this, I have other brands that are coil brands that look like a spiral. I have some that you can make like what looks like nautical rope. Let me see if I can, yeah, I'll just show you a couple of those. I won't have time to burn them, but just to tease you a little bit. So this particular brand, we'll be making in the class that kind of you can roll it on the piece and do a border that makes it look like a nautical rope. A guy in San Diego came up with that. My Texas boys, I love Texas. I go to Texas whenever I can. They used this, they made the impressions, and then they used the basket weave brand in between theirs, and then put little and made barbed wire out of it, made it look like barbed wire. It was so cool. So we'll do things like that. Here's a brand that is the spiral that I was telling you about. This is Graham Priddle's kind of signature brand. He devised this by looking at the Koru fern of he's from New Zealand, and that's their country's symbol is from the Koru fern that is spiraled as it grows, and so that's where that came from. So, and then we're gonna play, and have access to all this. I'll bring all the wire and my equipment, and we're gonna see what people come up with. And we're gonna do that. Well, thank you for letting me introduce this to you and giving you some ideas about that. If there's any questions that you have while I'm packing things up, I'm more than willing to talk to you about it. I'm moving around. I'm still listening to you, but I got to pack things up. But thank you very much for bringing me in.